Hello, and welcome to this episode of ESG Talk, your go-to source for insights and advice from leaders in environment, social, and governance. I'm your host, Mandi McReynolds. Integrating ESG into corporate strategy, well, it isn't always easy. Transforming it from an ancillary issue to a core board competency requires significant collaboration and sustained effort. I'm so delighted to bring to you today two phenomenal women who we've had many dialogues over last year, including at Climate Week and Workiva's Amplify on this very topic, and thought it would be critical to bring it to you, our ESG Talk audience. We're discussing today the C-suite with Kiy-Morrocco, who is the head of ESG governance and reporting at Cognizant, a $20 billion global technology service provider. Also joining us is Amelia Pan, an incredible colleague and friend, and oh, by the way, who used to be one of the first ESG podcasters when she was at Brunswick. She is the managing director in ESG transition at PJT Partners, a global advisory-focused investment bank. Amelia also serves on our critical external stakeholder group on Workiva's ESG Advisory Council. Kiy and Amelia, so wonderful to be together again as we kick off this season of ESG Talk. So Kiy and Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mandi. Great to see you again. And Kiy as well.
Hi, Amelia. Thanks so much for having us on, Mandi.
All right, so let's dig right into the hot topic. Kiy, let's start with you first. In the role and head of ESG governance and reporting, how do you partner with the C-suite? That's a big piece as organizations move through financial and sustainability transformation being linked together. Specifically, how is the information about sustainability initiatives shared, and what extent are you involved in that strategy and execution as you start to manage up with the C-suite?
Yeah, so Mandi, we've seen over the past several years a big shift in sustainability reporting. For Cognizant, what this has meant is moving from what were really CSR reports that functioned more as a marketing vehicle to moving to ESG reporting that is aligned to globally recognized third-party standards like SASB, TCFD, GRI. And with that move, we have brought in our board of directors at a level that didn't exist before. So what this means is, throughout the year, we make sure that we are reporting to the board, bringing them along. So reporting on our initiatives, our progress, and also ensuring that our ESG report is reviewed at the board level. What this includes is making sure that our board stays up to date. So board level education is something that's quite important for us. Especially with our clients becoming more and more sophisticated, we want to make sure that our leadership also has the level of education to keep up with that and to be able to advise us appropriately. And we want to make sure that all our strategy is visible at the board level and that we are ensuring that any progress prior to communicating it externally, we're communicating it internally to our leadership and the board.
I value that you talk about education and executive and board member training. I know that was a big part of our discussion at Amplify and Climate Week together as a team. I know for my own self, it's really in true partnership with our chief legal officer on, okay, how do we bring people along in this whole transformational journey that we have? Amelia, I'm curious from your perspective, what role do sustainability leaders have in educating and training executive board members on various ESG issues, and how have you seen it evolve from your perspective?
Thanks, Mandi. Well, really, the sustainability leader is the conduit between all the evolving expectations and the vast amount of information, thought leadership, evolving standards, and bringing that to the company and to the board. And so sustainability, as we all know, touches so many aspects of a company, has impacts across areas like talent attraction and retention, operations, procurement, financing, community relations, and even M&A decisions. So for that reason, the sustainability leader has a tremendously important role to play in setting the sustainability strategy and socializing it across all areas of the company. So in terms of training and elevating the knowledge level of the executives and the board members, they can make sure that sustainability is regularly embedded into CEO and executive team communications so that there is a consistent message being sent to employees, investors, regulators, and other stakeholders, and they know that senior management is an active partner in orienting the company around sustainability. And I think exactly as Aya said, through regular sustainability presentations and offsites to executives and the board, they can ensure that directors are up to speed on the material sustainability issues that could impact their company's risks and opportunities. I think finally, some questions that sustainability leaders can really help executives and board members answer are: do we have the resources we need to respond to the data required by international reporting standards and US policies? Are we telling an integrated story that aligns our sustainability initiatives with our core purpose and values? Are we highlighting valuation relevant information as part of our corporate narrative and equity story? And how are we engaging with our shareholders and proxy advisors on ESG issues?
Those are all really excellent points, and I'm making notes off to the side as you're talking about it, just a takeaway for our audience to think through those pieces. What's interesting enough in Workiva's own practice and journey is we've addressed each charter of our board committees to integrate ESG where it matters. And at Cognizant, I'm curious how you've looked at it from a risk perspective, consideration at this executive level. Same for you, Amelia. Building off of Aya's remarks, I'd love to hear you chime in on what do you think is kind of a management framework that organizations should consider, because many a times it hasn't gone through the audit committee, and so it's a new process for organizations to consider. So Aya, how about you help us out here a little?
So it is very important that leadership is engaged, right? If we think back to 2019 and Larry Fink from BlackRock's letter, that letter was addressed to the board of directors. And so, when he was talking about how it's important to disclose information around your environmental initiatives, your human capital management, he was speaking directly to board of directors. What we've done in-house in order to ensure that leadership is truly engaged, we stood up a governance and sustainability committee under the board. And so while the audit committee, for example, is responsible for enterprise risk management, which includes ESG risk, the board as a whole oversees ESG risk through these committees, governance and sustainability, as well as the audit committee. Our chief sustainability officer, our CEO, our general counsel, and other cross-functional work streams come together in order to review this risk and report it up through these channels. In 2022, for example, members of the Governance and Sustainability Committee met to review ESG strategy as well as performance. And this includes our net zero goal, physical climate risk, as well as ESG reporting. And so we want to make sure that particularly those targets that are public and most visible to our stakeholders are going through review at the board level. One other thing to mention is, we disclose not only through our annual ESG reporting, but through several ratings and rankings platform, external sustainability ratings and rankings platforms. One of these is CDP, for example. And prior to our board approving our 2019 baseline numbers, for example, we did not disclose those numbers to CDP. That actually led to us taking a hit on our score, but we want to make sure that before we put information out there, that it's first reviewed and approved by our board of directors.
I think Aya said that so well. The only thing I would say is, by looking at how companies integrate ESG into their enterprise risk management framework, it can actually uncover potential new risks that they may not have realized before, right? So looking at businesses through an ESG lens, you might uncover that physical risks related to climate change and risks stemming from the global transition away from fossil fuels is going to have an impact on you where you might not have recognized that before. So we see many companies trying to understand the ways in which sustainability risks can manifest across the organization and where these might intersect with other risk types, maybe more traditional forms of risk.
I think there's a really good practice there with as we look at materiality assessment and double materiality. Even Workiva in our own practice on page 11 of our report showing our materiality was a partnership with risk. And we started to identify things as opportunities versus risk monitoring versus emerging topics. And I think we're going to start to see more of that come into play as we think through both voluntary, as you articulated with CDP, versus mandatory practice like California to the SEC, to the CSRD, to other regulations in LATAM and the Asia market. So I'm curious, with all of these movements of voluntary and mandatory practice, how is this affecting the C-suite involvement in the strategy and reporting function? What are you seeing from your perspective, Amelia?
Well, I think it's a very welcome movement, right? What I used to always hear from investors is that companies would cherry pick the best news to disclose, and it might not have been the most accurate, and it might not have been so helpful in helping them make investment decisions. So, mandatory reporting creates a level playing field, which provides investors a baseline to evaluate a company's sustainability activities. And those activities then are, rated, and those ESG ratings can impact everything from investor buy-sell decisions, competition to attract the best talent, and the cost of capital. I'm sure you've all seen, but Deloitte cites a study which says that better ESG performance correlates with higher company returns by nearly 4% annually. So compounded, that's a lot over time. And ESG, we see in M&A transactions, ESG-focused companies can enjoy premium valuations. So a strong ESG rating can position a company for a more attractive exit valuation, and a poor rating might cause an M&A deal to fall apart. In addition, if a company has been found to overstate its green credentials, it could face fines and litigation, which will ultimately impact the company's ability to meet its growth ambitions.
I want to kind of go there, and I am wondering if you might share with us a little bit. Amelia talked about compensation and kind of moving it a little bit up in this conversation. Tell us what Cognizant is considering with the ESG goals and their compensation policy, and is this a good idea? Why or why not?
So it can be a good idea if it aligns with the company's strategy. So for Cognizant, we implemented an executive committee compensation metric focused on gender diversity globally and the retention of talent. So for a knowledge-based business like ours, our supply chain is completely knowledge-based. We fully rely on our workforce and their skill sets to drive value for our clients, to build innovative services, and so for us, our workforce is paramount. So for the first time in 2022, our executive committee compensation included a metric, like I said, focused on gender diversity globally and on developing and retaining talent. In addition to this, every leader at the level of director and above has a goal relative to their business area for hiring and retaining women at the senior manager level and above. In 2022, our gender diversity rate at the senior manager level and above grew to 17.2%. Within the IT industry, this is part of how most companies are seeing growth with diversity. We want to ensure that we have diversity of thought within our workforce. We believe that this is how we bring more value to our clients. And because this is of paramount importance to our strategy as a company, it made sense for us to link it to executive compensation.
So it's interesting too, as we talk through the C-suite to compensation to risk. We found last year in Workiva's Global Practitioner Survey, and as a reminder to our audience, was over 900 professionals that actually worked in ESG around the globe. It had to be a core part of your job and your responsibility. And there was this disconnect between the executives, so think about the C-suite, the board, some of what we're talking about today, and the practitioners, so individuals like Aya and I who are actually boots on the ground working in ESG. 62% of executives strongly agreed that their company applies the same due diligence to ESG reporting as they do financial reporting. And 32% of managers said the same thing. So you're almost looking at a 50% difference between what level of rigor organizations from executives to managers really think are happening. And I wanted to hear from both of you, why is there that disparity? What's going on there? And give us some perspective on how companies can bridge that gap between those two groups. Amelia, you want to kick us off here?
Sure. It doesn't surprise me. I think it's really encouraging that 62% of executives agree that the company applies diligence to ESG reporting in the same kind of measure as it does to financial reporting. I think there is a lot of will from senior executives to focus on this topic and to commit to this topic and to really move ESG reporting along. I think what we see from the ground, though, is that the practitioners who are actually responsible for collecting the data are still at a much earlier stage of maturity. and might not have the resources that they need in order to report everything as fully as maybe the senior executives might wish. And so a pain point that we see amongst the companies that we talk to is that the sustainability function, as we were talking about earlier, sits at the core. It's a connective tissue in the company. It touches almost everything in the company. And getting data that you need from each of these business lines, who are often in different locations or who often use different types of technologies to even record the data, can be really difficult. Even understanding what data to collect can be difficult. So I think there is amongst, I would say maybe not the largest companies like Cognizant, but amongst companies in Europe and some smaller companies, there's still a struggle. We haven't overcome that yet, even though, this has been a conversation for a number of years. There's still a struggle in collecting the data and making sure that it's the relevant data. And again, against this backdrop of greenwashing fines, there's a reluctance to publish anything that might not be accurate.
I think Amelia hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely true that we tend to see leadership having the will to put forward more rigorous and more accurate reporting. However, that does come with, the need for more resources to be put into that reporting. And what that means is for folks on the ground, whether that's, facilities, real estate, these people have day-to-day jobs. And so it truly ends up being a competing priority for these folks to not only essentially stop what they're doing and get together this data, but then also put together the evidence and the documentation to back up that data in order to ensure accurate, complete, and relevant reporting for stakeholders. And so what we need to see here is not only setting the tone at the top, but cascading that down. Leadership has to clearly communicate to its managers on the ground that this is a company priority and that everyone has a role to play.
So interesting enough, right? I love when the three of us get together because we're always talking about various topics and just, what's happening in the market today. And we had a really interesting dialogue right before we hit record that I actually would love for us to put out there for our listeners. You were talking about this triangle of fraud, and Amelia, you were talking about, what's going on in the market with companies as they face this regulation. Let's just share with our audience a little bit of that perspective. I know we were coming off of COP28 discussions, and so tell our audience, what are you playing around with and hearing from your perspective of the market as we think about sustainability now maybe potentially being linked to the fraud?
Yes. So coming out of COP28, we've been seeing the marketplace abuzz. And one of the things that recently came up that I've been privy to was discussing greenwashing within the context of the fraud triangle. What we're seeing is with increased pressure on companies to appear sustainable, perhaps really truly to be sustainable, with ripe opportunity in an as yet minimally regulated environment and marketplace, and really the high potential to rationalize such action as greenwashing by maybe underestimating the ability of the market to understand or for stakeholders to parse through disclosure. I think it's truly crucial that we pursue a multifaceted approach to combat greenwashing because given the environment that we're in today, there is just so much opportunity for this to happen. And I think that as compliance professionals, we need to help companies, we need to help practitioners find their compass in how to navigate through such a difficult time.
I think that's right. I mean, in contrast to where we were a few years ago, where there was so much enthusiasm and there was a lot of capital being deployed into sustainable solutions and sustainable investments, we're seeing companies not necessarily take their foot off the gas, but speak a lot more quietly about it. And, this term green hushing has become bandied about here. I don't know if you guys have it in the States, but companies are still pursuing their sustainability activities. But when you have the CMA in the UK and when you have the regulators in Germany really cracking down in a very severe way on greenwashing. My fear is that the unintended consequence is that companies will pull back from their sustainability activities for fear of getting caught in this greenwashing net. There's reputational damage, there's damage to customer loyalty.
So I think that's a very interesting piece. As I had talked about, it's getting more complicated. And I think what's top of mind for me in the new year is there's a lot of discussion around action and accountability. And I think when you have action and accountability, it's really coming back to even just the fundamental principles. You want to protect your company against fraud or against accusations, then how are you ensuring the data is complete? How are you ensuring the accuracy of your claims? What are you doing to look at third-party verified assurance in some way, shape, or form? And what's your map to that process? And I think, as you said, Amelia, companies are on their journey. They're not intentionally going after greenwashing or being called out for greenwashing. And as we have, what you said so well, regulation and rigor, it's now like, how do we make sure we protect ourselves from the risk, but also ensure that our company is still moving forward with great opportunity? So looking ahead to the new year, what should be top of mind for leaders when it comes to moving their ESG goals forward? And Aya, why don't you kick us off?
Well, certainly, I think for many, regulation, both that has already passed, and what we've seen in California, and what's coming down the pipeline. For example, Europe is going to be voting on corporate sustainability due diligence directive next year, in addition to CSRD that's already passed. So regulation is certainly top of mind for everyone. I think it's important to also keep in mind that companies like mine have increasingly sophisticated clients. And so we're seeing them asking more complex questions. So whereas a few years ago, the general question was, do you have a sustainability report? And today they will regularly ask questions like, could you tell us more about how you incorporate climate risk into your enterprise risk management? And so what we have done is make sure that our board, which is responsible for overseeing the company's enterprise risk management and management framework, including processes for identifying, assessing, monitoring, and mitigating key business risks, which includes ESG risk, that they are navigating this very difficult time without a whole lot of guideposts, without putting transparency out there for transparency's sake. I think recently we've seen many large companies and actually leaders in the sustainability space moving away from some of their more lofty goals. And part of this is because we've seen them get further and further away from their company's North Star, from their company's strategy. And so I would say, as regulation remains top of mind, keep in mind to avoid transparency for transparency's sake. So one way to do this is to ground yourself in your stakeholder assessment, or maybe a priority assessment. Identify your stakeholders early on and ask them what is important to them. And those are really the areas that a company should be focused on. That being said, we're also probably going to be seeing more rigor and hopefully more relevance in the disclosures that companies put out there. Particularly for Cognizant, as we see our workforce getting younger and younger, we find that those younger associates care more about what a company stands for. And they want their expectations of their employer are changing. And so it's important to keep a finger on that pulse. And so make sure that you are paying attention to your stakeholder assessment and not just going where the winds of the market take you.
Just to build on what Aya said, I think 2023 has not been an easy year for sustainability and ESG. And I think despite the noise, maybe this will give people some comfort. I mean, we've seen that AUM and sustainable funds remain positive. More funds included ESG in their fund names than removed them in Europe this year. And so I think it's really important for companies to adapt to the political landscape, right? So, earlier before the call started, we talked about whether or not ESG is a term that's still being deployed in this space or if people have shifted. And we've certainly seen companies use other terms like values, impact, and assets, climate, risk, and advocacy. What these kind of words mean is that these companies are emphasizing the business case for ESG. They enhance long-term performance. ESG reduces risk. It creates value for shareholders and stakeholders. So, building on what Aya said earlier, aligning ESG with your core purpose and mission rather than splashing out a label there can be a way to continue to really focus on your sustainability activities without maybe drawing the negative attention or the backlash that we've seen this year. Importantly, I think, again, as Aya had said, engaging with your stakeholders, build trust and dialogue with customers, with your employees, your investors, your communities, and your policymakers. Really make sure that they understand what you're doing, make sure that you have support, and they understand that this is what your business is and what it stands for, and it's not just a fad that you're pursuing.
Well, thank you both for providing that perspective. And I think you did an excellent job for our listeners bridging what happened in 2023. How do we think about the year ahead and really continuing this conversation from the executive level, C-suite, to how we then move out to our broader stakeholders and engagement. So thank you both for being on the show and encouraging us to get together once more.
Thank you so much for having us, Mandi, and thank you to Workiva for continuing to drive these cutting-edge conversations.
Thanks, Mandi and Aya. It's always so much fun to be chatting with you both.
And to our audience, as always, thank you for joining us for this episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk. If you're interested in learning more about Workiva's Global ESG Practitioner Survey, please click on the link in the episode description. And for more about ESG in the C-suite, I recommend checking out our episode with PwC Germany from Season 2 called Reporting Leading Transformation. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate or review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We'll talk soon.